Hey, welcome everyone. My name is Matt Kiesner. We'll be talking about the SSAT and the ISEE and it's been a lot of changes in terms of with COVID, and a lot of those changes are still in place. There's a lot of options for testing for this forthcoming year, and I know there's also a lot of demand and interest in possibly switching schools and going into private schools. So it's a great time to kind of learn a little bit about that process and get things going. So I'm going to get my presentation here pulled up and share my screen. And we're doing this live tonight. So if you have any questions, we have the Q&A part open here. So if you want to type in any questions, I will be happy to answer those at the end. So just give me a second to get things going. Okay. Hopefully my slideshow is showing up there. So as I said before, my name is Matt Kiesner. I'm the tutor training manager here. So my job is, I work with students and I train new tutors, and I also help write materials. And I'm also kind of our expert in the middle school tests. They kind of found that niche, and I worked with quite a few students on these tests to help them get to the schools that they're of their dreams. It's been I like working with the students in the middle school grades. I think it's a good change pace from the SAT, ACT, and the tests are they're quirky, but I do kind of enjoy some of the test challenge of those, so to speak. So we got tons of stuff to go over here. All right, there we go. So what we're talking about is we're going to talk about both the SSAT and the ISEE, and just the sort of general setup. I'm going to do SSAT first, and then we're going to do ISEE. I'm not going to go back and forth because I think that's more confusing in terms of one or the other. So if you were interested primarily in the ISEE, hang with us. We'll get there, I promise. And understanding what has changed. That all the options that were available last year due to COVID are still options, and so you need to, as a parent, make sort of the best decisions for how to test. And I can walk you through some of those processes, and then also understanding how how these scores are used by schools, and kind of talk about a testing timeline. Good news is starting in June, this is like the time to really start this process, because what I have seen is a lot of families take the test in November, they get the scores, they're disappointed with the scores, perhaps they're even freaking out about the scores because they're seeing a student who is an A student, get a percentile that is, maybe below 50th percentile. And then they come to us, and then they're trying to ends up having winter break ends up being a bunch of tutoring and not a lot of fun. And so I think a long, steady approach is going to be better. So I appreciate everyone joining us tonight, because this is definitely going to be helpful. So I think that one of the key questions is, if you're looking at these acronyms, is what test should my student take? And so there's the SSAT and the ISEE. And if you have older students or older children and know the SAT, ACT thing, that answer is always, it's whatever the student likes. All schools kind of see them equally. That is not the case for these middle school and high school admissions tests. You need to check with individual schools, and many schools only partner with one test. So there are SSAT only schools and there are ISEE only schools. There's been a little more change in the last couple of years. So I'm here in Atlanta, and Atlanta is traditionally an SSAT city, and that's what, 3 or 4 years ago, I'd say that would be the only test in town. But some schools have started opening up to ISEE here in Atlanta, and so where that's not most of them, but there are some even offering it. It's like a test site. So what you need to do is you need to check the admissions page for every school applying to, and don't make an assumption on there. If you're in different markets, there are definitely really strong ISEE markets. And then there are ones where it's varied. So, really you have to do the research. Every private school has an admissions page. They will tell you what the expectations are. So the information is out there, but I don't want to make a blanket statement on there. But it's more likely that a student's going to take one or the other and not necessarily have to take both. So I'm going to get into the SSAT, and we'll talk about some of the COVID changes here and stuff. So there are 3 levels for SSAT. There is elementary, middle, and upper. We'll be primarily talking about middle and upper. I do have a slide about the elementary process because that's not a very common test, and it's not offered until December. So, and here in Atlanta, there's actually a different JATP that educational psychologists give. That's like a different. That's kind of they use that in lieu of the elementary school test. But so these are also for currently in these grades. So this would be now that we're in the summer. This would be so if you have a rising 8th grader and who's going to go into 8th grade, they would take the upper level test. And if you have someone who is a rising 5th, they would be in the middle. And so the SSAT is part of the Enrollment Management Association, and it used to be called the SSAT Board. So the EMA, that's their website, and there's quite a bit of information on there. And then some places are very, some cities are very strong with SSAT exclusively. So let's talk about some of the things that changed with COVID. So in response to COVID-19, the EMA started offering in-home testing, and that was a completely new thing starting last fall. And I have checked, and according to the current website, in-home testing will still be a thing and will be an option for this forthcoming year. So unless they go in that policy, but it's pretty late to change it. I think honestly that they invested the time and the technology and the partnerships in that, and so they want to get their get more of a return on that. So there is the SSAT at home, which is using a secure online platform and accessing it through a computer. They started offering also computer-based testing at Prometric testing centers, which are they're very common. It's a lot of places. It's a place where people take the GRE for grad school and those kind of things and business exams. And it's a testing center. And there's tons of them. I checked, and there was a Prometric testing center 5 miles from my house. So they're all around. There's also the paper-based flex and benchmark testing. And we'll talk about what those are later. And then they have resumed monthly paper-based testing, kind of open enrollment at a standardized test date at certain locations. So there's 4 options for a student, and a student isn't necessarily locked into one option. Once you choose one, so you could go from paper-based to at home, or do a flex test, or do a Prometric. So the student can register for those. So the SSAT home is offered every Saturday. And one Sunday for someone who has a Saturday Sabbath. Though I don't think you have to declare. I think it's just open enrollment on there, and that's going to start in October. Is when they don't start the season until October. And so there's also multiple start times, and so if you're on the West Coast, you don't have to wake up at 6 a.m. to meet the 9 a.m. East Coast time. So that's good. Which also means if you have a kind of a student who's not a strong morning starter, you might also be able to start testing at 11 or noon. So depending on things. And then I think it's kind of a frustration is you have to purchase and then you get the schedule. And so and when you're navigating the website, is that they want your money first, and then you get to choose a time. And I can see why that's frustrating. As a consumer, you kind of want to know when, and then you pay. But unfortunately, that's not the way it's set up right now. And so PSI is going to be the provider of the technology, and so the security. They have a testing browser, so it has to be downloaded. It needs to be downloaded ahead of time. And basically, it's spyware. I mean, to be as blunt as possible, it takes over your camera and it locks your computer. So is that it will restrict other applications. So if you were to click out of the testing browser while the test is going on, that would end the test. So that means you couldn't click out and use the calculator built in the computer, or go on the internet and do a search or something. So it's pretty locked in software on there, and then they are definitely taking this kind of stuff seriously. So for the SSAT, students get they're on their desk. They can have 2 sheets of paper, pencils, and then water in a clear bottle. And so they have a kind of a rule for all their testing is that they assume that students going to like put geometry formulas in the tech on like the in their water bottle or something. So it has to be, a clear bottle on there. And there will be a room check. And so before the test starts, the student needs to go in front of the camera and basically show that there is no cell phone, that they don't have a calculator in their pocket in there, and kind of like show and possibly move the camera around, show the desk and stuff. Which is honestly, it's kind of weird, to have someone on the computer tell your 10-year-old to like open up your sleeves and stuff, but that it is what it is, because they are taking the security seriously, and so the good news is that parents can be in the room for the room check. So I think that that's a good idea as a parent, just to reduce the anxiety, because I think they're hopefully there would never be anyone abusing the power, but it's also it's just kind of strange to like let someone on the internet boss your kid around. That's my feelings. And so yeah, they're taking it seriously, and then students will receive warnings of exam violation. So they need to remain on camera the full time, and they're using things like eye tracking software. So a student can look forward at the test and they can look down at the paper. If the student is, and this is pretty common, right? You conceptualize the problem. So you look up at the ceiling is just kind of organize your thoughts in your head. That will actually trigger a warning, like, hey, or if you look to the side or something on there. And then the microphone is live, so any kind of noise is going to, or they also will pause the test. Obviously, if there's something bad, the kid's just sitting like that, the test is going to be over on there. And so they everything's recorded, and so like they have their own little like jury if someone is seen like they violated the rules. So the structure and the timing of the SSAT at home is the same as the paper-based test. The test is not shorter or anything. So the students can choose to self-pace, and since if they are done with a section, they can say, because it's not on a global timer, it's not like every kid starts at the same time, they can choose to move forward. This is very dangerous. I had a student who is a 5th grader that I was working with and tested at home, and his mom told me that he finished the test in 50 minutes and the test should take 3 hours. And he decided just to be done with things, and his scores weren't good, because he clearly could not handle the responsibility of like staying in each section, because once you say I'm done with section 1, like you're done. There's obviously you can't turn backwards on there. So that can definitely be something to watch out for. And the interface is the same as if you go to EMA, they do sell an online practice test. It's exactly the same interface. And so if your students are concerned about the what it will look like for reading passages, for example, it'll be like the text will be in the left column, and one question at a time will appear on the right column. You can kind of scroll through the text. It's the same thing. There are no features, like there is nothing in there to help a student take a test. There's no highlighting tools. There's no way of annotating or drawing or taking notes or masking answers. There's just not, it's just pick the one. You can't. There are other platforms like the ACT platform where you can like mask answers or like eliminate an answer and not necessarily not have to see it anymore. There's none of that. It's a very bare bones kind of setup. And scores are fast on those. So an SSAT at home is probably 4 business days. So you'll get the scores very quickly. So let's talk about the Prometric ones. So Prometrics are, it's computer-based testing. It's at a location. If you took a GRE or something like that, you probably took it. And so you need to like search Prometric, registration and find places that offer it. And you can see, like I did a Google search and there's a Prometric, location real close to me. So they're all around. And so Prometric might be better if you want to do online testing, because like you don't have to worry about distractions. It's obviously going to be like a secure environment, and also you don't have to worry about internet connectivity. if the internet does stall out on a home test, they give you basically a short window to like reconnect. But obviously, there are definitely been students who got booted out for tech issues, and then like, we're not able to finish the test that day. Or Prometric, you're not going to have that issue. And then there's the flex test. Flex test has been around for years, and it's kind of a quirk of it. So a flex test is a paper test, and it can be scheduled whenever you want. And it is usually administered either by a counselor or an educational consultant on there that offer them. And so as you schedule it, but the thing is, you can only take that test once. So there's a student can take one flex test per year, because there's literally one flex test. It's not like everyone's taking the same test. And so flex tests are great when it's maybe January and the student's struggling to get the best score, and you want to have like, it's, an extra test date, like flex, kind of keeping the flex test date for later is definitely a solid idea. And those releases will be they'll be later than the computer-based test. Will probably be a couple weeks or so. And then there's also benchmark tests. Benchmark tests are set up by school, so typically it's schools that are feeder schools that are K through 6 or K through 8, and then they have the expectations that students will continue in private education into high school or middle school, and so those are set up by the school. And if you are at a school that offers it, then I would certainly take it, because it's another opportunity to take it. But as an individual, you can't put one. It's basically the flex test, but for for a whole school. And then there's going to be standard test dates. So they started start in October, and obviously that they're still going to be under COVID guidelines. And so I would imagine that many locations are going to have a lower capacity. When the room that was supposed to hold 30 kids holds 12 kids or something. So just know that I would highly recommend registering if you want to do the in-person test, like doing that ahead of time to make sure that those are done. So we'll talk a little bit about the actual structure of the test and kind of get into some content there. But that's the main idea of the four options this year for testing. If you have any questions, as just a reminder, you can put them in the Q&A chat. I can answer them. That they'll be archived, and I can give you an answer if there's something that was unclear or want additional clarification. So the elementary level test, this is for students currently in 3rd and 4th grade, is only in person. There's no online test for those, and they don't start administering that until December. And students can take it twice in person and have a flex test, and that's the only options for elementary. Again, elementary is not a terribly common test for a lot of places. So if you have someone, a student who is in 3rd, 4th grade, I would honestly check if the school wants the elementary test, because you may find that they do their own evaluations. Again, there's the JATP test here in Atlanta, but there's other kind of more developmental psych evals they use rather than like a standardized test. But let's talk about the middle and upper. So like the middle and upper are pretty similar. There is obviously some more advanced concepts on the math section, but I mean, they're more similar than different. So I'll kind of be talking about both of this. If there's a distinction, I'll mention up. So the structure for the middle upper test, there is an essay that's unscored and we'll talk about what that means. Then quantitative, which is the word for math. Reading comprehension. There's a verbal section that includes synonym and analogy questions, 30 each of those. Another quantitative section, and then an experimental unscored section. And so that's the structure is exactly the same as middle and upper. In fact, when you have in-person testing, middle and upper students test in the same room, because there's no difference in terms of the time. So for the essay, they did do a update in 2020 about the prompts. For middle level, it's one narrative prompt, which is like at the beginning of a story. So it's like a narrative, and then one kind of a personal statement where it's like about your to tell you more about yourself versus like being completely fictional. And for upper level, they got rid of the personal statement, or sorry, for the narrative statement, and one is personal and one is analytical. So one's about yourself, and the other one's like applying ideas to something outside on there. And so the essay is not scored, but it's sent to schools, which actually gives it some weight because they know that, if they ask for a writing sample to be sent to your application, that obviously a lot of parents are going to meddle and try to make sure that everything is perfect, and that obviously this essay is unfiltered, that the parents didn't get to do any typos, and also I think they kind of use it as a personality indicator, because if the student writes a really weird essay and gets into some very dark or troubling territory, I mean, that's obviously they can see that as a red flag of maybe this is not a student we want on our campus. So for calculators, for quantitative, calculators are not permitted on SSAT unless the student has an accommodation. If the student has, you can get a 4-function calculator as an accommodation, but nothing like a scientific or anything like that. And so it's the test is more about like logical reasoning, problem solving than heavy computational skills. Obviously, knowing how to add fractions is going to be really useful. But a lot of it's more about like your ability to kind of solve things quickly and efficiently. And both middle and upper are going to include arithmetic and number theory, algebra and geometry concepts on there. And so the upper level is going to have more advanced concepts, and they've been putting in a lot into algebra 1 concepts, so including linear equations, dealing with factoring, some spatial reasoning stuff. Where I said the middle level test primarily focuses on the relationship between fractions and ratios and percentages and understanding and decimals, understanding that they're all kind of the same thing. Like that's sort of the main concept for middle level. And so, give little strategies, read questions carefully. There's a lot of reading on the test. Write down your work, even if it's online, you have to make sure you use the information well there. And then, double check you answer what was asked, because there's a lot of times the wrong answers are also, the wrong answers are like things that are true. So a good example would be asked you for the area of a circle. The circumference is going to be one of the wrong answers, right? And so we see something like a problem here, and so we have a couple example problems. I don't know that because I am trying to get to both things at how much we can go in here, but here it's important is they give you the area is 16 inches. What is the length of the diameter, right? And so the making sure you pay attention, it's diameter. Because I'm almost certain that one of the wrong answers would be the radius, right? And so the student would have to know that area equals pi r squared, and that's outside knowledge. They do test on those things, and so then we can just substitute in 16 pi for that, for pi r squared, right? Pi's cancel out. Take the square root of these, and then we give us perfect squares. We got r equals 4, and many students are going to pick A, because they did the work and they found that r equals 4, and that's great. But obviously it goes back to here, diameter is double that, and so the correct answer would be C. Okay, classic example of that. And then here's another kind of thing. They like giving you problems that look really challenging, but aren't. And so what is closest to these two awful numbers? Well, if we look at the answer choices, I mean, these are not like, we're not dealing with precision, right? These answers are not near each other, right? So what we can do is just, say, well, 60,207 is basically 60,000, and 2081 is basically 2,000, right? And then we can do our little trick where we can cross out zeros on the top and bottom. And so we turn this terrible problem into what is 60 divided by 2? Well, that's not too bad. It's 30. And I will tell you, will be a lot of students who will do this the hard way and do the long division, because they assume that the SSAT is trying to test like how much they're willing to endure. And it's not. It's testing how clever you are you, and can you look at the answer choices and see this and make the deduction like, hey, I don't really have to do a lot of work here. I can cut corners. And so it's definitely a lot of students kind of struggle with that initially. All right, so let's talk about the reading section. So they have about 7 to 8 passages. It can vary. Like I think they kind of do it by word count versus like how many actual total passages there are, and about 5 to 6 questions. Sometimes a little bit less, depending on how it spreads out. And it's going to be a wild mix of things. It could be narrative passages, expository, persuasive, and older passages and new stuff, and even a poem. There is like all kinds of, like it's a pretty big wild card. None of the passages are particularly long. And there's it's going to be oftentimes 10, 15, 20 lines, compared to the SAT would be like 80 lines. So they're short passages, but there's like all kinds of things, and definitely going to be dealing with some older language and stuff. And they love like questions about inference and tone of the passage, and kind of like and also like literary devices. They've been doing a lot of that lately. And so what's important is to read carefully and actively, and like really kind of to learn the passage and be able to sort of summarize that passage. If you're taking an in-person test, I would certainly advocate grabbing a pencil and like writing down notes and writing on the passage. Obviously, you're taking the online tests, you can still take notes, but obviously you're not going to have that interaction of being like highlight things or anything. And the best way to sort of deal with this is to try to find non-supported words in the answer choices. Like it's easier to do this in reverse. I know that they love tone words, and so like the things to be author's tone, and some of the vocabulary can be kind of tough. Like asking a 5th grader what the word ambivalent means. Like there's some difficulty there. And they also like figurative language, like asking about hyperbole and alliteration and that kind of stuff. So, and then next we got the verbal section. So the verbal section is 30 synonym questions and 30 analogy questions in that order, and they are ranged from easy to difficult per category. So the first synonym is more or less the easiest, and the last is the hardest, and then it goes the first analogy is easy, and then it goes up to hard. And so synonym questions are just a word with not any context, and so some of them will be challenging words, but also they're going to be words like lesser meanings of things. So they like using words with multiple meanings. So here you see the word flag, and your brain goes like pennant or banner or symbol, but it could be flag as a verb, and so it's to flag someone down, signal. Or champion, you're thinking like winner, but really it's champion as a verb to support. And so analogy tests the relationship with the words, and so with that is you have to create a sentence for that idea. So like some little example problems here. So the word objective has the different meanings. It could be the goal, and that kind of thing. But if you're looking at the answer choices here, objective is being used as an adjective, and so an objective tone would be something that is like non-biased, like sticking to facts. And so if you keep it on that idea, the best answer is actually neutral, because to be objective is to not be biased, right? And so C would be the best answer there. And then we have concerned to frantic. A lot of students will see these as synonyms, but they're not. Frantic is stronger, and so if I were to kind of miss, I might flip the words around and say frantic is stronger than concerned. And then I can just kind of keep it as balmy, stronger than frigid. No, that doesn't really make any sense. Is perturbed stronger than furious? No, I would say furious is stronger. Is elated stronger than content? Yeah, elated is pretty strong. We'll go with that. Is perplexed stronger than sad? Those don't really have a relationship. And is reserved stronger than ecstatic? No, definitely not. So it has to be C. And so you kind of you just create a relationship and then sort of apply it to each of those. All right, I'm not going to talk about the second quantitative section because it's the same as the first. There's no pattern there, but there's going to be an experimental section that includes problems from all sections. So we'll have like a reading passage and some analogies and some math and stuff. And it is not scored, but you have to take it. You have to sit there. You can't be dismissed early. And it's just an opportunity for test writers to try to get some feedback on there. But it doesn't. It does not affect the score if you trust the SSAT to be honest. I don't know. So let's talk about scoring. Scoring is weird for the SSAT. So they offer a scaled score, and the ranges are a little bit different. So middle level is kind of pushed back to 470 to 770. And the upper level is 500, 800. I don't like these scores. for those, because as like if you start thinking like SAT, a 500 on the SAT is like it's like an average score, because SAT goes, or sorry, SAT goes to 200, 800. So 500 is like, in the middle. But if you had a 550 on the upper level test, I mean, that is a very low score, right? And so like make sure that you think of them as your own things. So five, as I say down here, 550 on the SAT and 550 SAT are very different. 550 is like, you're college bound, you're on the right track. Where 550 on SAT is like, you clearly don't understand this test. And then all the thing is that they're going to offer the scores for each of the 3 sections. So these are, the section scores of quantitative, reading, and verbal. And they're also going to offer percentiles for the grade total and percentiles for grade and gender. So they will say, like 8th grade total, and then if it's a boy, 8th grade boys, and so on there. So let's talk about, we'll get to what the percentiles are in a second. But the other thing in scoring is that the SSAT still has a guessing penalty. Guessing penalties are very rare. I would have said that the only other time a student might encounter a guessing penalty is the SAT subject test, but those have been terminated. They were ceased to exist earlier this year. So yeah, there's like, it's not something that a student typically, so when a student gets a question wrong, they lose a quarter point off their score. If they leave it blank, they get a 0. And so strategic answering and omitting is something that like I have to work with students, and it's a weird conversation to have. It's like, hey, like, you would do better if you did less, because if a student's struggling with certain math concepts, like, okay, let's just recognize that you haven't taken geometry, and like we'll work towards getting there, but right now, like, let's just leave those questions blank. That's probably going to serve you better. So how do we understand these scores? So for schools, the percentiles from first percentile being basically the worst score to 99th percentile being the best score, that's what schools are interested in. So the actual scale scores don't really have any value. It's just those percentiles. And they do have the percentiles between grade and gender. I don't know how schools use that. If there's one that they prefer, I think it's the schools don't really make a statement on that, and I don't think, and they usually the percentile differences is like, it's maybe one or two numbers. It's not a big change on there. So having worked with a lot of SSAT families, I will tell you that there's oftentimes a shock when you see a student's percentile scores. I recognize that I deal with a lot of straight A students and who are like academically engaged, and a lot of families, honestly, I think don't take the test seriously enough. And obviously everyone in this room does, because you're taking time out of your evening to meet with me. But like, this is not a test of their like proficiency at grade level. They definitely test concepts the students haven't seen, and so like this is really just a test of how they do on the SSAT. And the SSAT, like at its core, it's an old school IQ test. It's testing how good you are at being clever, which is not really a skill set that's necessarily taught. And it's also important, as it says on here, to recognize that the percentiles are not a nationwide ranking of all students. Students who are in public schools do not take this test, so they are not in that pool. Students who are in K through 12 programs at a private school, they are not testing it. And so what you're in a population with very motivated, very prepared students. And I've literally seen everything from a first percentile student to a 99th percentile student in my experience. And I can say that on both ends, where someone started at the very bottom, and I've seen someone get all the way to that. And so just recognizes that everyone in that range is still like a pretty good student. And the first percentile student, it was actually an issue of that he was a non-native speaker, and it was was really struggling with the vocabulary of everything. Honestly, it wasn't an intelligence thing. It just didn't grow up in the United States. I think it's just important to like recognize that this is not a the percentile is not indicator of like a ranking of your student for all things. And I think it's important as a parent to recognize that it's just one thing. It just says this is how good you are at the SSAT. The good news is I think you can improve it. You know, it is a coachable, learnable test, and you know, I can say, speaking personally, I have a track record of success. Like I moved people's percentiles up on there. So, and the other thing is that it's going to be a frustration is that you're not going to see schools give you a percentile cutoff. If you are like, if we think about the college process, and you have like a big state school, a big state school, like you can kind of know that if you get this GPA and this SAT or ACT score, like you're probably going to get in, right? Like you can play the numbers. You're not going to see that in any schools for SSAT, and they don't say you must get 60th percentile. Why is it? Well, we're dealing with a much smaller population, and they have to build a campus, right? So they obviously want good test takers because that's going to lead to high SAT scores and AC scores and good colleges later. But they also don't want like 100% like brilliant test takers because like they want to have a full campus life, right? They need athletes, right? If you're going to have a sports program, you need someone who's that's good at that, right? And then there's value in having that person on campus, right? You want to have musicians, you want to have an orchestra or a band, right? And you want to have a theater program and actors and all those other things that make campus life engaging. And so like it's important to recognize that the SSAT is just one piece of that puzzle, and that it shows that you're good at testing, honestly. But know that like as you present your child to the schools, it's important to think about all those other pieces and knowing that like, well, he's a strong soccer player and he plays trumpet and he's interested in debate, and then make sure that so they can say, oh, like this person fits other categories besides it. Obviously, like you want to do well, but I think it's important to kind of see that more holistically, and that's why schools are not going to say 80th percentile or bust on there. All right, so for study plan, that like spaces do fill up, especially if you're trying to do in-person ones. You may have to like I imagine there's going to be a lot of demand. Yeah, last year there was a lot of SSAT demand that my company saw. And I expect this year to be as well. There's been a lot of frustration with certain kinds of schools and how they dealt with COVID, and so people are looking to jump ship and to try something different. So obviously COVID exposed a lot of weaknesses in school administrations, right? Because of the stress of that. So just know that that's you expect know which type you want to take. Does the at-home make sense? Or does paper make sense, or Prometric, and then kind of get the format. Make sure that a student knows what to do with the online computer testing and the sort of rules, especially like, hey, like you click forward and you leave that section, like it's done, buddy, like you did it. And then for paper testing, make sure there's a couple of bubbling, like especially if you're fifth grader and in certain programs, if you're gonna kind of Montessori kind of thing, like you've never filled out a Scantron, and so make sure student like has some practice with that, because I've seen some very poor attempts at bubbling over the years, and I think we kind of just make an assumption that the student knows how to fill out the form. Make sure the students understand the guessing penalty, and it's okay to leave things blank. Like you do not have to I can think of a student who was a fifth grader and got 98th percentile last year. That's obviously very impressive. But she didn't get, I looked at her scores and like the breakdown, she didn't get everything right. It wasn't 100%, but she got 98th percentile. I mean, it's just like A+. And so, but like just like you don't, like you really aren't supposed to get all the questions right. And so that's okay. I certainly suggest that since you should try to test more than once, and like students do oftentimes better on a second test. They know that there's probably going to be a plateau, that there's just a point where that you can try testing every weekend, but the student is not going to be necessarily showing improvement because they're not gaining new knowledge on those things. And then most families want to end by January, because usually Admissions are done around sometime in February. Some schools it's February 1st, sometimes it's February 15th or something. And so the early February test date is kind of like the last attempt. They do offer tests in the spring, but that would be something. I would be something very like conditional, like, hey, like we would love you to be our star football player, but you must get an SSAT in here. Here, take the one in April. So, and then okay, some study plan things. I would recommend a slow and steady approach. I think here we are in June. It's a great time to start the process and not have it be stressful. If vocabulary takes a long time to learn, I would recommend daily vocabulary. A site that I like for my students is freerice.com, which is a free site that does free, basically their synonyms. And when you get questions right, they donate grains of rice to a food bank. So a lot of students are motivated, like, oh, I'm helping someone while I help myself. And so that's nice. And that's as it says, it's a free site. It's just, I offer some vocabulary study on there. And ask them to push themselves a little bit harder on books, maybe, reading some, children's classics and stuff on there, to kind of like get used to that language choice. That can be helpful. And then, reviewing some math concepts, being good with fraction, decimals, percentages, ratios, probability. Understand they're all kind of the same thing. Pushing forward some algebra concepts, especially for the upper level, and then including some geometry. Students need to know area, circle, and all that kind of stuff. Oops. All right, so real briefly, because I want to make sure I get enough time for SSAT. ISEE. There is a character skill snapshot. Some people don't know what that is. It's like it's trying to give you a personality test, and it is if you purchase an SSAT, the character skill snapshot is a free add-on. You can go take it whenever you want. You just go access. You sign into the website, and I think it takes whatever 30 or 40 minutes. And so it tests an emerging, developing, or demonstrating skills, and there's not like you really can't do poorly on it. It's not trying to catch students in there. And so they have there's two question types: forced choice and situational judgment. There's not a right or wrong answer, just people are different, and this is kind of helping show that. And so forced choice is they have to choose a statement they agree with and the statement they least agree with. And so as you can see, these statements, they're there's not the wrong answer. There's not the answer I try to harm people when I think I can get away with it or something. It's not there's not the psychopath answer. So hopefully they can just different are you an introvert, extrovert? Do you like to work in a team? Do you like to be a leader? Those kind of things. And then there's situational judgment in here where they tell you there's a problem, and here's a mixed state, and then you what's the best thing to do versus what's the worst thing here. There's one there might be the one where if you're kind of being a little bit rude. I think answer A is probably the least tactful, but there's not an awful choice, right? So all right. So at this point, I'm going to transition to the ISEE. So let's make sure that everything I say forward is to a different test and a different company for a different provider. And so there's obviously parallels, but just make sure that we're understanding those differences there. So the levels are a little bit different. So you have lower, middle, and upper. And the big difference is that if a student is in 5th grade, for the ISEE, they take the lower level, but if they were in SSAT, they would take the middle level. And that's the big difference on how they divide on there. And so, these are schools affiliated with ERB, not EMA. Some places ISEE is very, very popular. In some places it isn't. And so again, check. Unless you are applying to a ton of boarding schools, I don't think that most students are going to take both tests on there. And then ISEE did their own changes there. So they offered an ISEE at home. This sounds very similar, right? And they offer Prometric testing center. And then they also offer their paper-based tests at select locations. And so they're as far as I can tell, they're continuing on with that same process. So they're very similar, and the only difference is that the ISEE does not have a flex or benchmark test, and they never have. So there are some differences. So they use a company called Proctor that is that is set up to offer things on security. So you have to go to the Prometric link and then get the system readiness, download the browser, same sort of thing. Make sure it works with your system. So the difference is during the test, you can have 2 sheets of paper, 2 pencils, and you get 2 tissues. You get no water, but you're allowed to blow your nose. So, where the SSAT is, you get a bottle of water. I'm just the messenger here. So, so the ISEE is wants a 360 room check. So you need to move the camera around and show all things. You have to empty your pockets. They check your sleeves so you don't have notes in there. If you wear glasses, you have to put them up and show that there's not a listening or recording device. They're a little more intrusive than the SSAT from what I can tell. Same thing, parents can be in there. I would recommend that if you're a parent, that you be in there, just to make sure that the student doesn't feel overwhelmed or super anxious because of a rando on the internet telling them to empty their pockets and pull up their sleeves. And I've even heard that you may have to use a mirror to actually see the device so that you don't have a bunch of post-it notes around the outside of your computer. So you may have to provide a mirror to show that your computer isn't full of help. All right, there's gonna be a little bit of redundancy here. Fair disclosure, these were 2 separate presentations last year that were we were doing a power packed one, but obviously that probably they can talk to them, they can chat with the proctor if there's a problem there. But any violations of eating, drinking, leaving the room is going to would lead to dismissal of exam. The structure is the same. Students can only eat, drink, use the restroom during the breaks. They're not allowed to have any kind of pauses in between. And students may have to do a security check after they return. So check the pockets, check the glasses, I don't know, spin the camera around. And scores in there will be 10 to 14 days after completing the test. And so that's not any faster than any other ISEE. And then ISEE has been partnered with Prometric for years. It's been you can go in there and try to find times and locations on there of different Prometric sites on there. So Prometric, again, same thing. It's going to be secure testing environment. You don't have to worry about internet or anything like that. And depending on where you live, the at home or Prometric may be your only options, because there's not great nationwide coverage for ISEE in-person exams. So there is paper-based testing. It's typically at an ISEE affiliate school. And it's important that there is not a nationwide test date. So you would have to really look out and know that a school. Yeah, I'm going to use Atlanta as an example. I don't know if that applies. I know Galloway is a school that affiliates with ISEE here, and so you'd have to check that Galloway's date is October or whatever, and just know that that's that might be the only time you can test in that. If you want it in person here in Atlanta, because there's not a lot of schools that are affiliated with them. And to know that it is you want to really get ahead of that, because there's not nationwide test dates. And well, I guess we'll talk about this. There are testing seasons. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So, but let's talk about the structure of the ISEE. It is different than the SSAT. So it starts off with the verbal section. The verbal section is a mix of synonyms and sentence completions that are kind of like the old SAT, where it's a blank and stuff. Then there's a quantitative section that is a mix of normal math and then also this quantitative reasoning, which will make more sense when I show you that. There's reading comprehension, passages, then math achievement, which is more math, but really pushing more advanced concepts, and then one essay at the end. So that it's kind of reverse of the SSAT. Verbal is 20 synonym questions that are the same thing, word of no context. And then what's different is there's no analogies, but there is a sentence completions, which are 20 multiple choice questions with 1 or 2 blanks on there. So we see the thing here, disparity. We can use the verbal is less tricky on the ISEE. They just need knowing that, par means equal and dis means not. So it means not equal. And you can go with, boom, it's inequity. Would be the stuff there. And then we have, this, if you took a SAT between 2005 and 2015, or even earlier, this should feel real natural. Tyler's notorious blank. We waited last minute to start the assignments. Okay, well, it has to be something logical for someone who would wait last minute, and obviously that would be a procrastinator, right? And if it was 2 blanks, it'd be 2 words, and they would, each answer would have two words, on there. So for the quantitative math, there's 20 multiple choice questions, which are just, math, logic analysis things. And then there are these 17 quantitative reasoning questions where you have to determine, if possible, which expression is greater. And a calculator is not permitted in any section of ISEE. And I don't believe you can get a calculator as an accommodation. I'm not 100% sure on that, but that sounds right to me. So, they might play with some kind of like goofy systems here. And so here, this like, pound a pound equals 2a squared plus 6a. What is the value of 4 pound, 4 pound? Like, what we need to know is that this is just function notation dressed up to look silly. And so all we need to do is plug a 4 in for all these things, right? So, and then, follow order of operations, square the 4 first and then run things through. So not too exciting here. And here, you have like understand, like there's a lot of statistics on here. So there's a data set, the greatest values in error, for removing the error, what is the range of the data. So it's just following, so you get rid of 56, and then it would just be the max would be 24, the min would be 5, and the range is just the subtraction of those. So 24 minus 5 is 19. Easy stuff. And so let's talk about the quantitative reasoning, because this is a little bit weirder. So the answers are always the same in that choice A says that column A is greater, choice B says that column B is greater, choice C says that the 2 quantities are equal, or choice D, the relationship cannot be determined by information given, which is pretty common. And variables can be all real numbers. And so like that's going to be a big determinant. So if we try all the problems here, column A is x squared and column B is x cubed. I think a natural response would be, okay, well, this is bigger because cubing is bigger than squaring, right? But that's actually not correct, because it could be all real numbers. And so what if I plugged in, if I plugged in 0, right, then 0 squared and 0 cubed are the same. Or if I plugged in -1, -1 squared is 1, but -1 cubed is -1. And so I can mess it up by using different numbers. And the fact that even 0 doesn't, 0 is real. And so here the answer would be D. It cannot be determined because there's just too much variance between different numbers you put in for x, right? So and then you see like this kind of geometry, and perimeter of regular hexagon, it's not 9, so it'd be 9 times 6, and the perimeter of an isosceles triangle with a base of 12 and congruent sides that are twice as long. So that's you have to imagine there, and the base is 12, and then sides are twice as long as 24. And here's just some computation, right? So it's 24 plus 24 plus 12. Is that bigger than 9 times 6? That kind of stuff. Not too bad. And the read passages are 6 questions each. I mean, they're usually kind of expository in the sense that they're like, hey, let me tell you about something. Narrative passages are pretty regular. The reading passages compared to the SSAT are much easier. I think that I find they're like some of the easiest, honestly. They love asking structure and purpose of the passage. Like the first question is almost always the primary purpose of the passages too. But they're not tough. Like the passages are like, they're not old passages. They're just like, did you know this thing did that? And you just kind of read it and like, did you know that like hot air balloons work by heating up the air in the balloon? Cool. And they just kind of explain the physics of it. Same thing here. Read actively, pay attention to it. You can always answer questions by finding the wrong, by process elimination. They do ask some vocabulary and context questions, like, what does this word mean? Always use the context. And watch out for not accept questions. Those can show up on the test there. But honestly, the reading section I think is very easy on the ISEE, especially compared to SSAT, which I think is, asks much more difficult questions. We have the multiple choice questions, for math achievement. So this one is the achievement is like it's trying to push beyond what a student knows. So this one is definitely trying to like see if they know more than they should. So for it definitely for middle and upper goes beyond grade level. And like on the 8th grade test, I've seen, it's fairly tricky trigonometry. Nothing that you would need a calculator for, but just, like being able to manipulate trig functions. And then like dealing with matrices, which is like a pre-calculus concept. So you just know that they're definitely pushing, like they're trying to see how far you can go into math. And so if a student is really trying to get a high ISEE score, recognize that they're going to probably have to learn some new math concepts. And because like the way they test on them is not super difficult. It's kind of that like, do you know what I'm talking about? Have you seen this before? And you can be like, yeah, I actually know what a logarithm is. You can do okay. And, so here we have like a kind of question where, understanding some factoring stuff. And really it's, understanding that the factoring of x squared minus y squared is difference of squares. And so, x squared, terrible, minus y squared equals x plus y times x minus y, because that's just knowable. That's literally what the difference of squares is. And now we can do substitution, right? So that equals 40. So I'll just plug in 40 for the x squared minus y squared, and then x plus y equals 10. Cool. And then we got our x minus y, and then cross that out, right? And then so x minus y equals 4. And we didn't even have to figure out x or y. Right, we know those patterns, but this is like, we're asking an 8th grader to know difference of squares is that's perhaps the challenge on there. So, and there is a essay, it's 30 minutes. It's not scored, sent to school, same sort of thing. The weird thing is that if you're taking a paper test, you have to write the essay in ink, not pencil. So assuming some practice on that, because if you I think it's there to kind of force you to write, because you can't like just cross out a bunch of stuff. There's really no penalty to crossing stuff out, but obviously if you have a passage with like huge sections like scratched out, that definitely tells that a student has problems organizing ideas. All right, so let's talk about the scoring. The ISEE scoring is different. So there's no guessing penalty on ISEE. So obviously, even if you're dealing with matrices and the student doesn't know what a matrix is, answer it. So that's definitely good for students. The score is this ridiculous scale of 760 to 940 for each section is going to have that. I don't know where it came from either. It doesn't make any sense to me. And there's also a percentile score that's just per grade. They don't do the grade per gender, and also a Stanine score. And so the percentiles are good, but schools really like the Stanine scores. Like that's going to be a thing. So what is the Stanine score? Well, it is basically taking a percentile and breaking it into different categories. And so it's a 1 from 9. But if you look at it, it's not like equally distributed. So it's very much a bell curve kind of look. And so to get a 9 score, you have to you'd be in the 96th percentile or above, right? And you can see that very quickly it kind of pushes down. So obviously for Stanine scores you want to be 5 and up, and so like that tends to be the score that like a lot of parents like are obsessed with, rather than getting into the percentile rankings, which is just like this is essentially just taking percentiles and just lumping it in categories. And this Stanine scale is a that is a consistent. It doesn't change per test. Like it's literally the Stanine scale percentile conversion. It's it's a math standard. It's like beyond the ISEE. So what's important is that for testing timeline, there are seasons for the ISEE. There was a fall, winter, and spring, summer season. You're basically not going to use the spring, summer season. That's after applications. I think would be only rare exceptions. So the important thing is that a student can test the ISEE twice. And that's about it. And so you need to make sure to take a fall test. Do not wait till December, because you wait December, like that's it, like that was your one score on there. So if you're tested using the ISEE, definitely plan to at least have one test done by November. That is very important. You cannot squander the fall season. There is no test, there's no nationwide testing time or dates. And so like you have to like look at the and do the diligence and do the research on that. So same sort of thing. Register, make sure that you plan it out and find a place to test, because they're not nationwide. For ISEE, you have to do a little more research and know which kind of testing you're taking. Obviously, in home it's easier, for getting set up, in there, and then same kind of, these are basically a repeat slide. Don't want to go on too much here, but these are the same sort of approach, that slow and steady. Make sure you do some vocabulary. Know that you may have to push into some harder math, and at least give some cursory understanding of like trigonometry for an 8th grader or something, which is well beyond there. So that's my presentation. So I did want to thank you all for sticking around. Say that, like, currently this is our big sale, and so that extends until June 30th, and so we're doing a lot of educational kind of stuff. So certainly the SSAT or ISEE is part of our savings on there, and so if you're interested in getting a package, you can certainly reach out to the Applerouth /summer, or give the phone call there, or info@applerouth.com. And then if you're also like, if you're worried that obviously there's vacations and summer camps and stuff, our tutoring hours never expire. So there, if you want to purchase for the sale and get that discount and start in August, like we have no problem with that. That's a very normal thing. And so like there wouldn't be there's no expiration on these things here. So so anyway, I hope that you found this helpful, and you can certainly reach out to me if you have any questions about the SSAT. I'm more happy to chat, and if you want to want me to we can get you a mock test for SSAT. My email is just my name, mkiesner@applerouth.com. Throw that on there, so you can you want to shoot me an email, or if you're like, hey, that Matt guy is pretty fun. I bet my little kid would like that. Like we work with them. So yeah, hit me up. I would be happy to set up some sessions and offer some expertise. So so I don't see any questions on the Q&A, so I think we've concluded here. So I appreciate everyone listening, and oh, we do have a Q&A. Cool. So yeah, a great question about the essay. Is it the question is, how is the essay handled in computer format? Is it written in paper? No. The student would type. They would have a basic word processing program that they would use, and that they would type it in there. I do not believe that word processing program has any sort of assistance in terms of spelling or any kind of like grammar check on there. So yeah, you would not write it in person, or you would not write it, because then when it says that there's 2 pieces of paper, that's not for the essay, that's for just writing notes, to write your work. So if a student that is maybe not great at typing, and prefers writing pencil, that might be a consideration to think about, why to do it the other way, and have it be in person. But yeah, there's no paper-based essay option. Good question. So yeah, so if I don't know if anyone else has any questions, I'm happy to stick around and answer them. But if you sorry. So okay, so he's got another question that I'm happy to answer. So are you able to move freely from section to section in the ISEE? So I don't believe so, not to my knowledge. I will say that, like, as for me personally, living in Atlanta, I do tend to work more SSAT, and I don't have a student that I worked with last year who took the at-home test, but like if you are like, I think you got to, I think the timer set, at least to my remembering of looking over their program, which was admittedly like last summer. I don't think you can go, but also it's like it's not moving freely, and like on the SSAT, you can choose to conclude a section and then that is it. Like once you have stopped that work, you can't go back. So it's not freely, it's choosing to close a section and move on to the next section. But I don't think that the ISEE does that, though I mean I could be wrong. It's something to certainly check. I know that you can on the SSAT, but I didn't see that as I think it really depends on how, like, the way you can do that is that SSAT's section on the like there's not like a global proctor. It's just like everyone's kind of starting the test as they go. Where I think the ISEE ones have it like there's a start time and everyone is kind of like in a with a global proctor on it. I got another question here. It says like difference between your percentile and average score on the SSAT results. Yeah. So in SSAT, like the average score is going to like on a score report is you're going to have you're going to have the scaled score for that student, and then they're going to basically say what the average score is per that section, and then that average score is to do with the scaled score. It's not the average score of the percentile, because I think just by the rule of percentiles, the average is always 50th, right? I mean, that's like how percentiles are supposed to work, is that 50th is the middle, right? So yeah, it's just the average score is just using like the per grade, and that's the thing is because like the 8th graders are only being compared to 8th graders, not compared to 9th graders, that they're taking the same test. And so that's the like it's 2 different categories. So the average score is just like, I don't know. I think honestly for SSAT, all of the average score information is honestly kind of like, and all the scale scores, schools aren't using them, and it's nothing to sweat about. Schools want the percentiles on there. The SSAT provides more information than I think anyone wants. So hopefully that answers your question on there. So I appreciate the chats on here. I know it's getting late this year on the East Coast, so happy to again, my email's on screen there. If you have a question, you can certainly reach out to me. I'm happy to answer them as things go. All right. Okay, one more question here. So so if your kid's fast typer, okay, that's a good skill to have. It would be advantageous from time perspective to take the computer version. So maybe, and maybe the student, I definitely think there are students that do better in terms of composition online. That I think is something that I write for my job. I like typing because I like moving my words around a lot, and I don't like being locked into what I wrote on a pencil. But one thing is that you also recognize that you're getting to an advantage you might get on a computer one is that you're also maybe getting a little bit of a disadvantage on other sections. And obviously the essay is not the biggest concern because it's not graded. And so I would also weigh that with, like, you're going to be looking at geometry drawings on the screen, and you're not going to be able to interact with them, right? Where on paper, right, you can fill in, oh, this angle is 40 degrees, right? And you can draw lines and stuff. So like that's, I think, might be a disadvantage, right? Because you're not going to have that ability to just manipulate the graph or the figure. And also, like on reading, is like, does the student excel at reading on a screen? I think that there are differences in processing with reading on screens, and this has to do with like spatial temporal orientation and stuff. I think I did wrote an article on our blog about like trying to read on screens and some of the difficulties there and how to get around them. So I would think that speed of typing versus, like, does the student do well processing on screens and other, in terms of math, in terms of reading, those I think would be like, I would err on those skill sets versus just like, oh, a good typer. on there, because again, I don't think the essay should be like really the determining factor on which test formats to take. So hopefully that's my 2 cents on that. All right. So I think I'm gonna, I don't see another question, but I'm gonna call it tonight. I appreciate the interaction there and the questions again. Shoot me an email. I'm happy to chat. This is what I do. So I hope that you found tonight's presentation helpful, and best of luck on this process. I know it's quite a thing. So hope it goes well. Have a good night.